Welcome to the Deep Dive Books channel, where we hope you find something valuable every day.
This video addresses questions from several friends regarding Malcolm Gladwell's book, Revenge of the Tipping Point. Below are our responses for your reference. Question 1. Regarding monoculture, can Waldorf education be understood as a Nash equilibrium? In such a scenario, even if the education authorities realize the real issue, they would be unable to change the situation. So, to introduce diversity, would adding a few pumas solve the problem? Response. Waldorf parents can vaccinate their children at any time, without facing condemnation from the school or their peers. No one would even know. Therefore, this is not a Nash equilibrium, but rather a situation influenced by the prevailing overstory. However, refusing vaccinations has indeed led to outbreaks of infectious diseases, resulting in public health crises. Thus, it is understandable if the education authorities choose to intervene. More importantly, schools like Waldorf or Aspen Grove High should be allowed to exist as long as participation is voluntary. For the children in these schools, this type of education does have its vulnerabilities. Yet, for society as a whole, the existence of such extreme models enriches the diversity of education. If your concern is not how many children might fall through the cracks, but rather whether this region can produce Olympic champions or Nobel laureates, then you would want a few extreme or even highly specialized schools. The anti-fragility of the whole is often achieved through the fragility of individuals. Perhaps families with more resources or multiple children have an obligation to guide their kids toward more creative paths, exploring frontier possibilities for the benefit of society. Question 2. Regarding the magic third rule, I have a question. Why is it always 1/3? Is it simply because research and observation happen to find that the threshold is 1/3, or is there some deeper reasoning behind it? Response. Malcolm Gladwell's book does not provide an explanation for why the threshold is this specific number. It is not an exact figure. Sometimes it's 1/3, other times it's 30%, 25%, or even 20%, depending on the context. Also, it's not as if reaching the exact threshold triggers an immediate transformation, while falling slightly short has no effect. But generally, it falls within this range. I understand this as an empirical figure. Social psychology is not an exact science, and you can't derive this through mathematical proofs. The key takeaway is that such a threshold exists. When the proportion of a minority group is too small, it can be ignored. When it's large, it ceases to be a minority. What we observe is that, when a minority group is neither negligible nor too dominant, their presence becomes impossible to ignore. They are perceived as individuals, rather than symbolic labels. They make their existence felt within the group, and exert influence on the prevailing overstory. This could be a psychological effect that shifts group identity or a disruption in the balance of power. Either way, 1/3 is a minority that cannot be overlooked. I came across a review in The Guardian criticizing Gladwell's theory for lacking rigor and arguing that the magic third rule and the law of the few are contradictory. I think the reviewer simply misunderstood the concepts. The magic third rule refers to a group of minorities, even if they are ordinary individuals, having enough influence to affect the whole. The law of the few, on the other hand, describes an exceptional person, a superspreader, whose influence is extraordinary. These are two entirely different phenomena. That said, Gladwell could have infused more academic rigor into his book. The current narrative style might make it prone to misinterpretation. Question 3. Regarding, should Harvard admit more Asian students? I'm curious. Are these admissions criteria set solely by the universities, or do they follow national directives? Response. American universities have significant autonomy in admissions and enrollment decisions. First, many universities are private institutions, and even public universities are run independently by individual states. If you establish and fund your own school, it makes sense that you should have the authority to decide whom to admit. This foundational principle gives universities strong autonomy in setting admission standards, processes, and final decisions. For instance, if a university prioritizes the children of alumni, others cannot object. If Yale decides to admit the child of a wealthy donor, because of a large contribution, that's reasonable. After all, the donation might provide scholarships for underprivileged students, benefiting everyone. However, the government does impose certain interventions. The federal government, for example, has a responsibility to uphold civil rights. Just as companies are prohibited from engaging in discriminatory hiring practices, universities cannot engage in discriminatory admissions. This is why the Supreme Court can rule that Harvard must not consider race in admissions. Such interventions are fully aligned with constitutional principles. Moreover, since public universities are funded by state taxpayers, state governments have a right to intervene. At a minimum, public universities are expected to prioritize in-state students. Some states even mandate that state universities guarantee admission to top-performing high school students within the state, though not all states have such explicit rules. Additionally, the government can influence universities through funding programs. For example, if the federal government provides grants or low-interest student loans, it can require universities to meet certain conditions to access these funds. Private organizations can also impose standards, such as requiring universities to meet specific criteria to earn certain accreditations. Overall, these interventions are relatively limited and often non-mandatory. The ultimate authority still rests with the universities themselves. I believe this system is beneficial, as it ensures diversity among universities. For example, China's Zhang Guimei founded a girls-only high school to help mountain girls pursue education in cities. No one can reasonably object, saying, if all the girls leave the mountains, what about the boys? It's her school, funded through her efforts, and focusing on girls is her right. Beyond admissions, universities also have full autonomy in designing curricula and selecting teaching materials. This reflects the spirit of a market economy. If your graduates struggle to find jobs, it signals that your teaching is outdated. Universities are expected to anticipate future industry trends and attract students with forward-looking, practical courses. If a school aims to nurture unique talents, that's also welcome. Question 4. How can we identify superspreaders who propagate negative influences, such as rumors or negativity, early on? Once identified, what are effective ways to block such sources of misinformation? Response. This is a highly relevant question for our era and a key area of ongoing research. Just recently, I came across a paper by researchers at New York University discussing how a small group of superspreaders has turned social media into a playground, distorting our perception of reality. While only 3% of active accounts are toxic, they generate 33% of the content. 74% of online conflicts are triggered by just 1% of communities. 0.1% of users share 80% of fake news. On X, formerly Twitter, 97% of political posts come from the most active 10% of users. Discussions about COVID-19 vaccine safety on X were dominated by 0.35% of users, creating an echo chamber of misinformation. An analysis of 448,103 social media users found that one-third of low-credibility posts were shared by just 10 users. That's 10 individuals out of 448,000. While it's widely understood that influence is often concentrated among a few, the extent of this concentration is staggering. This isn't the 80-20 rule. It's the 1% versus 99% rule. This reveals that the voices on social media cannot represent public opinion. For example, if you open X and see 97% of posts discussing national issues in a critical tone, it might seem like the country is in crisis. But these voices not only fail to represent the entire population, but don't even represent all social media users. They represent just 10% of them. More importantly, these super users tend to be characterized by extremism. Moderates often lack the strong drive to voice their opinions online. For instance, in the U.S., the stark divide between left-wing Democrats and right-wing Republicans on social media creates an impression of severe polarization. However, this polarization exists largely because only the most radical voices are speaking up. The paper illustrates this phenomenon with 3 diagrams. In real life, public opinion is roughly a normal distribution, with fewer people at the extremes, deep blue or deep red, and most clustered in the moderate middle. However, moderates don't speak up online, so their voices are invisible. As a result, online discussions are dominated by the extremes, creating the illusion that society is sharply divided between two poles. This misrepresentation fosters the belief that society is on the brink of collapse, even though reality is far less dramatic. Similarly, social media exposes people disproportionately to fake news, conspiracy theories, and extreme views. Consequently, people perceive social norms as being more extreme than they are. Online interactions often escalate into conflicts, while offline interactions rarely lead to such hostility over unrelated opinions. Overexposure to online discourse can cause individuals to overestimate societal hostility, potentially becoming more radical themselves and bringing that radicalism into real life. It's clear that people should participate more in offline social activities and spend less time fixated on online content. Should we ban this small group of users and clean up social media? That approach has its challenges. First, it would violate constitutional principles like freedom of speech. Second, while these voices may be extreme, they sometimes serve as a wake-up call for society. Historically, progress in human rights and social reforms has often been driven by such voices. If you aspire to be a social activist or observer, you must learn to tolerate extreme opinions. So long as you can step back and recognize that online voices don't represent true public opinion. A recent study offers a simple and effective solution: unfollow. By unfollowing users who spread hostility, extreme partisan views, or low-quality information, participants in the study reported significantly higher happiness and reduced hostility 6 months later. Interestingly, the study also found that following accounts that share scientific discoveries increased feelings of awe and improved happiness. Combining insights from both studies suggests you can curate your information diet to influence your mood. Given the small number of extreme accounts, achieving this is relatively easy. That's it for today's content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.